last week was so fun. Like, I loved having my sister. I'll probably have her on next week just to talk about Jesus and revival and like what our hearts burn for. But this week, the Holy Spirit really pressed upon my heart to talk about mental health. And it's something in my own life that I have struggled with heavily. And I have watched God walk me through this valley and seat me at the table. And when it talks about in Psalms 23, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, for me that shadow of death was depression, and for a little while it was anxiety. And I honestly could say there were moments where I literally thought that was just going to be my life. Like, this is it. I've relegated myself to my bed and I'm never going to make it out of this. This is just how I'm going to have to live my life. And I've watched God come through like a beautiful father every time and pick me up and give me hope and joy and just excitement for life where I thought that everything was done, where everything was in shambles. And so personally, I want to say this. I know that mental health in the church has looked very unhealthy. Like, it has not been something that we are allowed to talk about. It is getting better. Like, I've watched a lot of people get a lot better about this, but it still has this weird kind of connotation or stigma on it where, like, if you ask for help or you go to a therapist, that those are things that mean that you're not relying on God for healing. And I want to say this to you, that all of those things are a lie. That God has created therapists and God has created so many things to help us through our journeys when we're struggling. And yes, he's there, and going to him in the midst of depression or anxiety, that is vital, but also allowing people that he has created to help you is also vital. So if you're like in a world where, because that's kind of how I grew up, was like, well, God will just needs to heal you from that. I don't know why you would ever go to a therapist. God just need you need to believe and rely on God more and have better faith. I don't know what you think this is. Like, it's all about God. And yes, I love the Lord with all my heart, soul, and mind. But I just want to say this, that I also believe he has created people to help me walk through valleys. And yes, he's walking through the valley with me, but also my brothers and sisters are meant to help me fight this battle. And I I just I think that there's a lot of people that feel shameful about feeling depressed, about feeling anxious because you love Jesus and you're like, I shouldn't be battling this. David battled it. If you read in Psalms, there are Psalms that are like, David's like, yeah, I'll sing to the Lord joyfully. And then you read a couple chapters later and he's like, why is my soul so downcast? Like, he's literally talking to himself in the midst of depression and he's going, what is going on? God, why am I going through this? I don't know what to do. And so I say all these things to say that if you're struggling with this, you do not need to feel shame. It is something that God knew we would walk through. Why do I know that? Because why else would he give us so many Bible verses about walking through valleys, about people who are feeling downcast, about people who are walking through depression? Like, why would he teach us these things then? Right? And so why would he speak so many verses about hope and joy and the battles you're going to fight, unless he knew you would face these things and he knew what would help you soldier on? So for me personally, I remember I got to this place in depression where I really had considered taking my own life. Like, I was like, I don't need to be here anymore. Like, I'm so tired. I am so worn out. Like, I'm so done, God. And I remember laying in my bed at my parents' house. I think I was about 18. And I remember laying there and I remember saying, God, if somebody doesn't reach out to me in the next 24 hours, I'm done. Like, I'm done. And I never in a million years thought I would get to that place. I didn't. Like, but I had watched God strip a lot of things out of my life that I thought I needed, and I no longer knew who I was as a daughter, and I fell into a deep depression because of it. And I remember my sister reached out to me, the one that was on the last episode with me, And she was like, "Hey, are you doing okay?" Like, it was within 2 hours of me saying that to God. Are you doing okay? Because the Holy Spirit told me I needed to call you. And I like broke down and I was like, no, I'm not okay. Like, I explained everything that I was just walking through. And she instilled so much identity in me that I did not see, and so much hope for the future that I didn't have. And I remember her praying over me and feeling this the biggest release ever. I felt this weight just fall off of me. And from then on, I remember I took steps of, okay, it wasn't like this like big magical thing where I was like, my life is back to normal. It actually wasn't like that for me. It was today I choose to get out of my bed and read my Bible. Today I choose to sit at your feet and just say, God, it's hard, but I'm choosing you today. And that was my journey of how I walked through the valley of the shadow of death. I chose him when everything inside of me did not want to. When there were days where I had so much anxiety, and I was just like so like to the point where I was like shaking and just couldn't handle anything. And I remember having to go to God and just sit there in the stillness with him and be like, God, I'm really overwhelmed. Like, and just sit and be with him. And I've watched my relationship with God shift, because I think for a long time I looked at my relationship with God as like, I can only come to you when I'm perfect. I can only come to you when I'm doing really well. And I didn't realize that actually God loved when I was struggling, when I would just sit with him and be really honest in the midst of valleys and be like, I'm not okay. But that's what casting my cares looked like, was sitting with God in the midst of almost a panic attack and being like, here I am, like, I'm a mess. And I've watched him supernaturally heal me from these things. And I want to say this too, like, I do still battle with these things. I go to a therapist regularly. I have like steps that I take when I know that I'm not doing okay, or I watch myself kind of falling back into depression or into anxiety again. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to struggle. I think a lot of times we think, okay, I'm over this, I'm done. No, like, you could still struggle with it later. And you just need to know how you won the battle the last time. How are you going to win this battle? Whenever I'm starting to fall into these things again, I go, okay, God, I'm going to go spend time with you. Okay, God, I'm going to go call my therapist. Okay, God, I'm going to take these steps of like letting people know I'm not doing okay. I'm not just going to hide away. I'm not just going to allow a season or a current situation to become a season and then become a lifestyle. And before I know it, I don't remember who I am. And I'm not going to allow these tendencies or these things that I'm stumbling into to become something the enemy can prey upon. Because one of the biggest things that I realized in the midst of my depression is like the enemy would attack me so deeply in my thought life of, yeah, you should just lay in your bed today. Yeah, you just shouldn't try today. Yeah, just don't. Just don't. Don't do any of those things. And after like day 10 of that, like, I'm like, what is going on? You know what I mean? I'm like, is that God? Like, I don't, that's not God, because God would have told me, why don't you come and lay down at my feet and tell me about it? Not lay in your bed and don't ever have communication with me. That's not relationship. And so the enemy will attack you in these things, but I want you to know that our God is powerful enough to overcome depression, to overcome anxiety. And I've watched him use my life to help others walk through these things too. And I know I already talked about it, but I want to say it again. Like, do not feel ashamed because you're dealing with deep mental health issues. Like, don't feel ashamed of it. Don't. And I want you to know this too, that God is looking at you with the same eyes of love in this season where you're struggling, where it's really hard to get out of bed, where it's really hard to go to church. I remember I would go to church in the midst of my depression and I would lay in the back of the room. Because I dealt again really heavily with depression when I was walking through grief, and I was just really angry. And I remember I would go to the back of the room and I would just lay there because that's all I could give. That's all I could give. I couldn't give him anything else. I said, all I can do is show up. and lay in the back of a room and not talk to anybody and leave. That's all I can give you. And I remember the Holy Spirit being like, that's a worthy enough gift. That, that is a beautiful gift to me. And I think a lot of times we think we need to give the most extravagant gift. But when you're struggling, your extravagance can be your tears. When you're walking through a really hard season and you're going, I'm in such a deep battle of depression, or I'm in such a deep battle of anxiety, like I can't do anything else, God, but give you my tears or show up. That is a good enough gift. Jesus didn't die on the cross for the mountaintops of your life only. He died on the cross for the valleys too. For the moment where it feels like everything is in shambles and you're falling apart, he walked through those valleys with you and he died on the cross for those valleys. It's going to be okay. It's not always easy, but it's going to be okay. It's not always a mountaintop season, but it's going to be okay. And I want to remind you of this if you're somebody that's like, I am literally laying in my bed listening to this and I haven't gotten out of my bed in 3 or 4 days and I don't know what to do. Can I just ask you, would you go to him? Even if it's from your bed. Would you sit there and get really honest with him? And would you cry and would you tell him, God, I'm struggling so hard. And all I can give you are my tears. But would you come meet me here? Would you come walk through the valley? Would you bring people to help me walk through this valley? Because if I can tell you one thing about my God, he doesn't leave you in valleys alone. Or else Psalms 23 is a complete lie. But if you read all of Psalms 23, I talk about it all the time because it's literally one of my favorite verses that I've had the most revelation of in the last few years. While I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And surely surely your goodness will follow me all the days of my life, right? But then there's also this part where it talks about you prepare a table for me, right? In the presence of my enemies. He prepares the table. And I was thinking about all of those things and I think about all of like the verses that God talks about all the time in Psalms and I'm like, man, like David was walking through depression and then he's like writing these things about like walking through valleys and then dwelling in your temple and sitting at your table. Valleys are meant to explain to you the beauty of sitting at the table. I have so much, man, like I don't want to cry, but I'm totally gonna cry because I always am crying. But I have so much gratefulness and love and honor for being sat at the table like never before because I've walked through really hard valleys. I am so grateful for being seated at a table with him that he prepared for me. And I like look at it and I know a lot of times people don't understand sitting at the table, but I just gonna explain it like I look at this table, this feast that he's prepared for me while he takes down my enemies and I sit there and I go, wow, what a father. What a friend. That while I was struggling, while I was questioning him, that while I was in the midst of hardship, he was going, I'm preparing a table for you. Will you still come? I'm walking through the valley for you. I'm taking down enemies for you. Will you still come? And I understand the beauty of the table and being seated. I understand the beauty of dwelling in the temple because of the valleys that I've walked through. A lot of people don't want to say they're grateful for their valleys, but I can honestly say I'm grateful for my valleys because I've been able to use my valleys to help other people sit at tables and dwell in temples like never before. I'm grateful. I wasn't grateful when I was walking through it. I will say that. Like, I was not grateful at all. I was like, what the frick? But like, now I'm just so grateful because I can see his hand in the midst of all of it. I can see him comforting me. So if today you're in your bed, if today you're really struggling, just ask him to come and meet you and tell him from the honesty of your heart, God, here I am. I'm real broken. I'm really hurting. But here I am. God, I don't know why this is a mess. But here I am. Would you meet me? Would you comfort me? Because your word says, if you seek me, you will find me. If you seek me with your whole heart, you will find me. And so I'm in a valley and I'm seeking you. Will you meet me here? I hope you go and meet him. I really do. I really hope you go and meet him. Because he's waiting for you. I think some of you guys need to understand the prodigal son. I always thought of the prodigal son as a story about a son who leaves and squanders everything, right? And about like people who leave the faith. But I never thought of the prodigal son as me in the midst of a valley. Me in the midst of a valley, being scared, being alone, and then my father running to me. Running to me. I want you to understand the significance of him running too, though, because kings or people of distinguishment do not run. That's why that story is so big. When the father ran, that's a big deal. And I want you to look at it like God. I want you to see yourself at the end of the path, coming so humbly with your anxiety, with your depression, with your hardship, with the season of whatever you're walking through. And I want you to see him running towards you with arms open wide, with tears flowing. Just so excited to welcome you home. Even though you feel like you have nothing to bring. Even though you feel like this is the weight of everything I have and you feel like your world is crumbling, the Father is running to you. He's running to you with arms open wide and a feast to be prepared in your name and your honor. And he's showing you off and he's going, this is my daughter. This is my son. And you're feeling like and you're feeling like less than. And he always brings you to being more than enough. Because in his eyes, you are more than enough. In the midst of the hardest seasons of life, you are more than enough to God. In the midst of depression and anxiety, you are more than enough. Man. Would you go meet him today? That's all I got. Then I cried again. I'm always crying. The Holy Spirit's been like getting me lately. He's like, let me take down your world real fast. I just really hope that you guys will go and meet him and cry and get honest. If you're a guy too, go cry. Masculinity isn't about having to be tough. Masculinity is actually about being honest. It is. Do you want to know? My dad is like, if, man, my dad. My dad is an amazing man. He's not, he's the reason I am who I am today. But like, the men in my life, and yes, the women of my life are amazing. But my dad is the reason I have such an honest relationship with God. Because I remember I grew up in a church that was going through revival, and I would look over, and my dad always had his hands raised to God, singing with his whole heart, and he would be crying with tears in his eyes of love for the Father, of honor for the Father. And it has shifted the way all of my siblings look at Jesus because of that man, because that is the view of masculinity that we are meant to have. My dad is tough. My dad is a protector. My dad is a father through and through. But I'm going to tell you this, you want a healthy view of masculinity? Go get before the Father, be honest, and let the tears flow. If Jesus can weep, why can't you? Because I'm pretty sure Jesus was a man too, through and through. I'm just saying. Some of you guys think your tears are weakness, but actually your tears are meant to break open the vulnerability of the heart of people around you. Like, I didn't mean to just go off, but I will go off on men sometimes because, man, like, if you guys could just step into what God has called you to do, if you guys could step into a healthy view of masculinity, of like, actually, masculinity as is as much in part about strength and protection as it is about being honest and vulnerable in my feelings. Boom. The church is a different place. We have healthier conversations. We have different conversations. When people come forth with hurt and pain and things that have happened and trauma, the way we look at it is so beautifully held because we are open and vulnerable in the midst of it. Man, think about it. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on that rant, but I did. I always do. But man, go get honest with the Father today. Have a good one. We will be back next week, probably with my sister. I don't know what we're going to talk about. We'll probably talk about revival, but I have to go outside and it's snowing and I'm not excited. So this is the end of this. Pray for me.